The following program was produced by Blue Ridge PBS and PBS Appalachia in partnership with the Virginia Department of Education to share resources for parents on problem behaviors like vaping and e-cigarettes, teen gambling, and opioid use.
As both parents and adults who care about our children, one of the hardest things to do is to try to help a child in crisis. Whether it's drugs, alcohol, sexual behavior, or other vices, it can be hard to be both helpful and compassionate while not either contributing to the problem or causing a child to shut us out. My guest today has spent a career working with and counseling youth in our region and is so valued that her fellow citizens went so far as to name her Roanoke Citizen of the Year in 2021 for her advocacy and outreach with children and adults. Dr. Cheri Harman is the Grant Project Director at Carilion Clinic Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Health, but that title doesn't do justice to all she does, and I'm thrilled to be in conversation with you, Cheri. Thanks for coming in today.
Thank you, Tom. That opening statement was so well put, very well said. It's certainly the hardest thing we do is raise our children and try to achieve that balance.
Yeah, I know that you have been involved in this work for a long time, and you and I have known each other a little bit for a long time. But I want to ask you this. I always like to start with just like, how do you think you got into the line of work that you're in? What, through your childhood, through your education, what led you to do what you're doing?
You know, I did have in my own life a pretty turbulent adolescent period, just in family stressors that, you know, so many of our families are subjected to. And I knew that having support at that time mattered and changed the whole trajectory of my life, right? So having school-based supports, other family supports, made all the difference. And I really think that influenced the direction that I headed.
Now, tell me about your schooling. Were there, you talked about the education support. Were there certain teachers or people in school when you were a kid that had an impact on you?
Yes, absolutely. I bet we all can think of that teacher, right, who saw something in us and believed in us. And, you know, that is what I would really urge people to do today when we talk about raising our children, not just raising them in our families, but raising them in our community, that we all look for a role that we can play to notice what's great about a kid and to zero in on that and help that child realize what strengths they have to offer.
I think that's so important because often when we're faced with a bad behavior, we focus so much on let's fix that behavior and not what is really remarkable about that person.
Exactly, and that's what can really heal the situation, is zeroing in on those strengths and being strength-based in our approach. Of course, as parents, you know, we're right there wrestling with the kids, you know, on a daily basis, seeing, you know, the good, the bad, and the ugly, all of it mixed together. I think that sometimes, certainly as grandparents, you know, it's easier to play that role of being the affirmation person in somebody's life. As a parent, living through the thick and thin is harder. You know, you are there for, you know, those bumps that can really be painful to watch and to witness. Also, it's humbling, you know, it's distressing. You know, you wonder, how did I contribute to that behavior?
You feel like it's a reflection of you, right?
Right. So it's the parenting role is the hardest of all. I love that I've now graduated to the grandparenting role.
I look forward to that myself. And I know that, like, in my own experience, if one of my children were behaving in a way that was kind of embarrassing to me, I felt like everybody in the community clearly is focusing on what my child has done wrong or what I've done wrong or whatever. And then when you really drill down to it with them, nobody's paying nearly as much attention, are they?
Right. And everybody has, you know, so many similar struggles. You know, you look at other families and you think, how come they've got it all together and why am I struggling? You know, what have I done wrong? But, you know, the data tells us that problems are really pervasive. Some of the latest that we've looked at that's really concerning is coming out of the CDC, Center for Disease Control, just issued their report on the last decade of trends. And one thing that just jumps off the page of this report is the huge number of high school students who, on this survey that they give, reported that they are so persistently sad and hopeless, they've been unable to engage in their regular activities for the past 2 weeks. That percent went up to 40%. It's just astronomically higher than we've seen that figure before. And that's true locally. You know, we have some local data that backs that up as well. I mean, even to the level of being suicidal, the numbers of youth saying that they've had suicidal ideation, made suicide attempts, are much higher than before. And there's certain populations that are even more at risk than others. I thought it was interesting that the female high school students have like a 60% rate of reporting this kind of persistent hopelessness. And then if you fall into the category of LGBTQs, that population is much higher than the rest of the population. So we have certain populations that are especially at risk. So I really, go back to that idea that I hope we all look for the role that we can play in our community, to look for the great things that can be encouraged in our youth, because they're doubting themselves.
And, I know we don't have enough time here to go into all of the reasons for that, but, I think about what's changed since I was a child in the 70s, right? And I think the pressure on kids is so much higher from parents, from society, from their phones and media.
Right.
What do you, when we hear, gosh, 40% is a huge number of kids who seem kind of chronically sad and unable to get their work done. What do you think is, what do you think it is?
Yeah, it's such a good question, and I wish I could definitively say I know the answer, but one of the influences I do think is social media. And we have to pay attention to what's going on with our kids in social media. So CDC, when it lifts up, what are the most important protective factors for our kids? How can we prevent problems? One of them is parent monitoring and parental engagement. And that includes what's going on their tablets and on their phones. We really need to pay attention to that. It is terrifying what's going on these tablets and phones, including access to drugs. Snapchat, Instagram, they've come under fire because of how easy it is to access illegal drugs. They'll, go to these little phrases they use, hashtags, access pills that will get mailed to them and could be laced with fentanyl. One of the other alarming statistics is the data on overdoses. And I hate to say this and report this, but the reality is that overdoses have gone a bit down in 2022 in the last half, except for among 15 to 19-year-olds. That rate of overdose visits has spiked up 45%. And you're probably reading in the news, kids who are losing their lives because of overdoses on, unsuspecting influence of fentanyl in a pill they got off the street. So we can't have enough eyes on our kids right now. And it's not just about monitoring them. It's not like policing them. It's as much just being engaged and finding ways for the family to be engaged together. You don't want them to have a lot of time with their tablets and phones alone, away from you. You really want to be engaged as a family. Hopefully engaged in some kind of joyful activities, you don't
Sure.
want it to be and you're under my thumb right now forevermore, It's and I'll have teenagers say, I'll ask them, how would you like to spend more time with your dad or mom? And they'll say, just play a game of cards with me, just be there, present with
Because
me.
and we can talk about how the kids are on their phones all the time. So are we, right? I mean, I've got to say, I get that report from Apple every week of my screen time, and I just can't even look at it anymore. So I'm like, how did I? Part of it is I work in the media and I spend a lot of time doing things for work, but that doesn't include all the time that I spend while watching TV and also on my phone at the same time.
Right. So. Yeah. So, having meals together where you actually like prohibit cell phones, to be looked at by anybody around the table, that's an important influence. There is the evidence of, too much screen time affecting the brain, thinning out the cortex, they say, and, these harmful effects of being on screens too much. Also deterring the ability to feel confident in social interactions. And so we need to lift up those chances for kids to develop their skills, to socialize, but especially don't forget to be engaged with them. I think we get this mythical idea like they don't want to be with us, because, we get that vibe, right? But actually, if we reach out and find ways that we can enjoy time together, the kids actually do still want to spend time with parents typically through their teenage years and into young adulthood too.
Right. One of the reasons I asked you to come today is that we are working on some things with the Virginia Department of Education on sort of vice issues that are happening with kids, and specifically opioids, and you addressed that a little bit with the fentanyl, but I want to ask you sort of some questions that I hope we can get some answers to, that just are kind of things that parents might be able to pull out and use as they go forward. So first of all, when it comes to opioids, fentanyl, prescription drugs, heroin, what are the big things that you think parents need to know? What should they be scared about? What should they not be scared about when it comes to that issue?
Yeah, so the social media part is something to take very, very seriously. Also, get any unused medications out of your medicine cabinet. When they surveyed kids, where are you most likely to get pills from? It is the home medicine cabinet. So we have to take advantage of these take-back days or pharmacies that allow you to return unused medicine. So you want to do that because availability is a powerful driver of use. So we want to make sure about that. The other thing is having conversations. And that's really about any of these risky behaviors, whether it's sexual risky behaviors, and you and I used to do teen outreach program kind of stuff together, very much focused on reducing sexual risky behaviors, violence and drugs. You want to be what they call the askable parent. You want to be available to have conversations with your kids and make it clear what you know about the risks and share them with your children. Study it together. Maybe you don't know it, but go to those websites that are knowledgeable, like NIDA, the official websites, and let kids know the difference between what's out there on the media that's just selling and what's out there on the media that's science-based. And have those conversations, and make sure that you let the kids talk as much as you want to be in listening mode.
Well, in many cases, they are as expert. It's a good way to find out what they know, too, right?
Right.
We all start with this idea that, I'm the expert on this, but really they're steeped in it every day, and I'm sure they know people who have ordered. And it's not just the dark web, right? There are people who are ordering drugs online and doing all that.
That's a good point, asking kids, and how do you see your friends using their phones? And, you don't have to tell me who or anything, but I'm just curious what's going on in your life. And it may not be an opportune time in your world. You might be exhausted from work, or it's the end of the day. It's inevitably not a great time when your kid starts talking. But prioritize that. Make sure that you make yourself available. When your kid is willing to talk, like my kids would say, Mom, don't multitask. Stop that. I need your full attention.
Well, I know in our own family, my wife talks about a little secret that she discovered early on, that she would take one of our kids to Taco Bell and order through the drive-thru and then sit in the parking lot. She said, I don't know what it is about Taco Bell, but it's like a truth serum with this kid. And we all have those little things that we can look for. One of the things that has been one of the big methods for fighting drug use, drinking in schools, have been largely based in abstinence programming. Don't do drugs, don't do this. What are your thoughts on abstinence-based, programs, and where do they have a place in our schools?
Well, I would say that in coaching parents, that I encourage them to have rules. And I'm not going to tell you what rules to have in your home, but have that conversation again. It's going to work best if you involve the family in coming up with rules and reasons for the rules. So you might have rules around curfews, different kinds of rules that you feel like are making your family life safer, more respectful mutually, and so on. And that's what I coach parents to do, is to have a conversation around the table that includes the kids in rules that we all agree on will make this family safer and happier in living together. So I won't say, whether you should have a conversation about this, that, or the other, but my personal experience and professional experience has been that you include the realities of the world in the conversation. So you know that if you say, don't ever have sex until you're 21, that's just not going to be realistic. So you want to shape the conversation that allows for the child to be able to say, I'm sexually active, this is what's going on in my life, and provide an invitation to talk about that, and then to talk about the best kind of contraceptive to have. It's going to be family by family, and families don't always agree with what would be my approach, but I would really encourage that conversation with your child.
Okay, yeah, I think that's good. If you suspect a child, back to opioids, if you suspect a child is using very dangerous drugs, how do you start that conversation?
Okay, a good question. I mean, any of these tough conversations can be hard to start, and so you're going to find your moment, the appropriate place, time, when people are not elevated. One of the things, another way I've coached parents, and this was back when I was doing a program that really addressed primarily marijuana use among youth. And I would say, okay, the first step in having a good conversation is making sure that you're all not amped up, right? I mean, you can find something out that will absolutely be like distressing and you feel amped up. You've got to calm yourself down if you're going to have a meaningful conversation. The children won't be able to hear a word if your level of emotion is so high that their brain has to shut down. So, there could be any number of things. It could be, a mistake of going on a church trip and drinking alcohol and getting kicked out. It could be any number of things, right? Like we've all been in these situations. If you're way amped up, you're not going to get anywhere. If you can calm the conversation down, get more information, have the child talk about, what were the factors that led in this direction? And who were you with? And, what made this feel okay? And now how do you feel about it? And get them to tell you the story rather than screaming at them about, how could you do this to me? I'm so embarrassed.
In my own life, I remember a conversation. It was a drinking incident with a bunch of friends. My parents didn't address it at the moment. In the morning, I dropped a friend off back at his house, came back to my house, and when I came in the house, there were the liquor bottles on the table, and my parent, and they practiced that, right? Mm-hmm. Where when we had the conversation was the next day.
Right.
They had been mad about it the night before, but we were all drinking, so they didn't say anything at the time. And I really remember that being
and that's another
an
thing is when
moment.
They're sorry to cut you off, but when they're altered, you're not going to get anywhere.
Right.
So that's the other thing is, having that conversation in the moment when somebody is altered will get you nowhere. You just say, look, we'll all go to bed, we'll talk about this tomorrow when we're more calm. The calm problem solving, and if you can model that, of course, none of us is perfect, right? We've all said things and wish we hadn't. But, if we can model calm problem solving and turn the crisis into something we can jointly problem solve and model how you can identify a problem, figure out possible solutions together, they've got a life skill that's going to hold them in good stead, their whole lives.
Yeah. When we talk about opioids, what do you counsel parents who come to you and they are in a full crisis? This isn't they just notice something happening, but they've got a child with a substance use disorder. Are there some treatments that appear to be more effective than others? And you know the science on this as well as anybody.
Yeah, one thing my primary message one is treatment works. There's treatment out there. When Beth published her Dope Sick book, there were churches all over this valley that wanted more information about how could this happen. And I had parents come up afterwards when Dave and I did talks on it, you know, confessing or admitting that they've got this situation at home. And number one, I wanted to say treatment works. You can get help for your young adult child or your teenage child. It is out there. And actually there's quite an array of treatment clinics now that didn't used to be available. So that's one thing to hold on to. Get people into the help they need. And another thing is to not pile shame on somebody. That is not going to make them feel like they can move ahead toward treatment. You want them to believe in themselves enough to seek out treatment. So you want to have
They already have shame.
Right.
You don't need to give them more, right?
Exactly. So, you know, just having confidence that I know you, I know you've gotten through other stuff before, you can get through this too, and we'll go for the right kind of help, you know, to get you where we want to go. And, you know, that's specifically for opioid use disorder, we do happen to have a medication that works like remarkably well. There's actually a couple. With the younger kids, we're more like we've used naltrexone, which is like a complete blocker. So what it does is it calms the cravings. These cravings are hard to explain, but they're like these biochemically driven urges, and you know, that are very, very hard to not act upon. The naltrexone will calm that down and block any opioid that's taken. And for young people, you know, that's a very viable option. You can get a shot for a month, and I always believe you have to combine it with counseling.
Of course.
You want to deal with the underlying issues. A lot of times there's been trauma that's not been dealt with. You know, I want to say that like as many times as I can is make sure you get help for somebody that's been through trauma, because that has made them susceptible for all kinds of risky behaviors. The other one is buprenorphine, and some people know it as Suboxone. That's the combined product of buprenorphine and naloxone, but it actually is very, very effective for helping the brain reclaim itself. We kind of compare it to insulin for diabetes. It helps your body recalibrate, reclaim itself. You see this person who is suffering from being hijacked by addiction to getting their brains back functioning again. Again, combining it with the counseling that's so important.
And not to harp on this too much, but I have been in forums and things where people who have successfully stopped drinking in 12-step programs and everything else will say, and this is very common, you're just treating a drug with another drug. This isn't treatment. This is medicated. This is something else. And how are opioids different than alcohol when it comes to that kind of treatment?
Yeah, what I want to say about the drug substitution idea is, you know, that something, a medicine that you're taking, a drug that you're taking that's medically prescribed, if it is enhancing your functioning, it's not that poison that heroin is. I mean, you know, the other opioids, the very strong painkillers, when they are being taken in a way that's misused and that's feeding addiction, your functioning unravels. You know, your life becomes worse and it falls apart. That's the difference. One is under a doctor's care, it's covered by insurance, you know, it's not going to be laced with fentanyl, for goodness sakes. It's safe, and it's going to help you reclaim your life.
Well, and that is something that we all have to remember, that is in this age of fentanyl, and I've heard this so many times,
Yeah.
you know, there are kids who, you know, a friend gives them what they think is an ADHD medicine or some other pill, but it came from a source that is not a pharmacy, and it's got fentanyl in it. And in the age of fentanyl, one you can die with one dose. Right?
That's it. Yeah, as they're saying, you know, the campaign is one pill can kill. And, you know, I know too many stories where that happened. That tragedy happens.
What do you think about the idea, you know, a lot of health departments and other organizations hand out Narcan, which is, that's a trade name of a drug that will revive somebody from an overdose.
Right, right.
Who should have that?
I'd be good with everybody. I actually was talking to somebody, a parent of teenagers, and they're very familiar with this because the parent is in the emergency department at Carilion. But she was saying her teenagers want to get trained in Narcan because of what they're seeing happening in their high schools.
I think it's as important as CPR training that I got in high school, and I've been trained, and we have it in multiple places in our house because you don't know if a tradesperson is in your house or one of your child's friends. An overdose can happen absolutely everywhere. We just have a couple minutes left. I want to have you talk for a minute about the importance of peers. Peers are people who are peers, and what is their role in the recovery process?
Yeah, I love talking about them.
We're really down to just about a minute.
A lived experience person, somebody who's been there, who has gotten treatment, is in recovery, and is the face of hope. And when you have somebody like we're doing now in the emergency department who's overdosed and then is paired up with a peer, they are much more likely to seek out treatment because that face of hope and proof that it can succeed is right there next to them saying, I'll walk alongside you in this journey.
Someone who has been successful in treatment.
Yes.
Well, we could talk about this for another half hour, but as we close the program, I'd just like to thank my wearer of many hats guest, Dr. Cheri Harman, for taking the time to share what she's learned about helping kids and families in our region. For What It Takes, I'm Tom Landon.
If you'd like more information on how to talk to your kids about dangerous behavior, visit the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration website for families at samhsa.gov/families.